Hello everyone and welcome back to East Haven County, our fictional county located somewhere on the southeastern shores of Massachusetts. In the most recent episode we went a bit fancy as we took this empty hill next to the downtown of Westport and developed it into a pretty small 5-hole golf course, but with some pretty stunning views, some cookie cutter residential development, and one of the more expensive streets of the entire county with these big mansions overlooking some pretty fancy views. In today's episode, I'm planning to do a major revamp of the map so that it looks a bit more like southeastern Massachusetts. And what I mean by that is that we'll be getting rid of this mountain. While it looks nice, it's just not fitting. I can't fix outside of the map borders, of course, but I can definitely turn this down quite a bit. Then we're going to reduce the overall amount of islands. I'll probably get rid of most of these small islands to the east, as this is supposed to be the opening to the Atlantic Ocean. And then I'm going to consolidate some of the remaining islands so that they're a bit bigger and a bit fewer in between. I'm also going to just make the map a lot more flat so that it doesn't have all these slopes and cliffs and stuff, and probably change the map texture theme as well so that we can get some a bit more sandy coastline going, which is very prevalent in this part of Massachusetts. Even though this rocky look of course looks really nice as well, it just doesn't really fit in. And right before we get going with all this fancy stuff, I would really appreciate if you'd like this video. If you enjoy my content, it really does help out. Thank you. So the first thing we're gonna start with is changing the map texture. It's a quick change that is drastically gonna change how the map looks. And the new textures we'll be using will probably react to creating shorelines a little differently, so just changing them up as the first thing is hopefully gonna make our terraforming duties a little easier. So let's bring up the map texture replacer mod, and the cool thing is that there's been a bunch of new texture themes released, especially since the PDX mods went online. And there are these from the Rockies, which are actually pretty cool. So if we change to the sandy one here, then obviously the full theme isn't really what we're going for, even though it does look pretty cool. But if we just change the grass diffuse to default, for instance, which kind of has a dark tone, then we do get these kind of sandy shorelines here. Of course, we've got some cliff texture poking through as well, but that's just due to the elevation being quite severe here, as well as on the mountains. But I think that if we really do extensive terraforming, make everything more flat, and create these bays and inlets that there are a ton of in Massachusetts, or this part of Massachusetts at least, as well as beaches and whatnot, then hopefully it's gonna look a lot more fitting. So before I start winging half of this episode, like I usually do, let's just take a look at southeastern Massachusetts and get ourselves a little more accustomed with what we're actually trying to achieve here. And I think the good thing is that the map we're using in its current iteration isn't all that unrealistic for this area. We've got a ton of peninsulas, we've got a lot of these bays and inlets, we've got a lot of islands, although not as many islands as we have on our map, so that's why we're gonna be consolidating some of the ones we do have. And we're gonna take some inspiration from Nantucket Island and Martha's Vineyard, which is a very interesting name for an island. And something that's really characteristic of these places is that they're relatively flat. And then they've got a ton of these coves or bays or inlets, whatever you want to call them, everywhere. And it really just makes them pretty interesting in places. I think they're pretty much just permanent like lakes. But it creates for a really interesting look. We've got a ton up here as well. Katana Bay, Potcha Pond. Some interesting names as well. So that's something we're gonna try and achieve. And then of course the beaches. There are a ton of beaches just about everywhere. And I think the interesting thing is, if we can just take a look at one of these, is that they actually really resemble Danish beaches, at least in the northern part of the country. So this really looks like a Danish East Coast beach, down to the like color of the sand and the weeds here, and this nature. So I think it's gonna be really interesting to try and create or replicate some of this, because it's very reminiscent to the type of nature that I have very close to me. So I think I'm gonna start by trying to consolidate some of the islands just south of downtown Chowder Bay, or the city of Chowder Bay. And maybe just connect that with a bridge or two, so that it's still two separate islands, because we have built Chowder Bay up with the restriction of it being an island, and we may keep that, but we don't need all these islands to be separate, and we don't need them to be this hilly. So the first thing I'm gonna do, which is kind of sort of like a brute force technique almost, is just enable Anarchy so I can work outside the tiles, and then just gonna select a very low elevation level, such as this, or maybe even go a bit lower, and then we're just gonna drastically reduce the elevation on these islands here, as well as bringing them together, creating a single unit. And I'm gonna leave some of the shoreline up here a little more coarse and rugged, just to create a bit more variance, of course. And we are gonna add some elevation so that it's not just completely flat, but it is gonna be pretty flat, and then we'll try to create some other natural features to make it look interesting. And I'm hopeful we're gonna be successful with that, so that we don't need lots of elevation to make a nice looking map. So what I'm gonna do now to try and make the coastlines a little more interesting is choose a different brush. And some of these mountain brushes are pretty cool, because they have some pretty interesting features, such as this one, for instance. So if we right click and use it, you can see that the shoreline is a little more random, a little more natural looking as well, a little more coarse. So if we just do that for starters, that's already a good change. Now, there's a ton of these bays or inlets, I don't know what you actually call them, in Massachusetts. So we're gonna try and replicate some of them as well. So to do this, we're just gonna grab a pretty low level, sea level, because they're like a pretty shallow inlets. And then just terraform in. And of course, let the water fill it. And then if we move in with some softening, then hopefully it's gonna look pretty good. And then in general, we just need the transition here to the deeper parts of the ocean to be a lot more smooth. Because otherwise, yeah, this looks way too steep, and the issue is that we don't have, we just have a very steep waters here and no visual transition, which we kind of need to mimic that Massachusetts vibe. So what we can hopefully do to alleviate this is pick a control line that's just beneath the surface here, and then just kind of add that around the perimeter here. And once again, using this brush, it doesn't create this perfect look, which I really like that it doesn't do. So we're just gonna move in here and create this so that it looks a bit more like shallow waters. And then we can come in with the slope terrain tool, mark this as our designated height, and then bring it up from the more deep parts. And then having added that, when we zoom out, we kind of get this look, which I feel is a lot more realistic. So you can kind of see a bit of a smoother transition, at least, to deeper waters around here. It's gonna be easier to create some beaches as well, using some sand textures. I'm gonna move in and do a little bit of terraforming to the island where Chowder Bay is located as well. Don't want to do too extensive changes because, like I said, I like the fact that much of the current layout of the city has of course been built the way it has due to geographical constraints. So I want to kind of keep that that sense of realism in place, but it is, it does have quite a bit of elevation and some cliff sides and stuff, so I'm just gonna smoothen a few things out, because I figure we'd want a nice beach or two as well in Chowder Bay. So we'll do the same, creating a bit more of a smooth waterfront. I'm gonna move in and raise much of the sea level here. Then we're gonna make the transition a little smoother as well. And it doesn't have to be perfect, it can be random. Probably should be actually. And then we can just smoothen this out. So I don't really mind that we have a few hills to make it a bit interesting. I just don't want like actual cliff sides to be a feature, because that's I don't think that's something we'll see a lot of in this area of the US East Coast. And then just smoothing all this out, and we kind of get the same visual look, which I think is really nice. We can keep this this hill here, and I wonder if we can actually make it look like sort of a dune instead, even though it's quite a big one. But I mean, if we move in and we grab the flower brush, then we make sure we've got a lot of different sizes as well as that, and then I deselect this flower bush, because it's got very powerful colors, so it sticks out a bit more. But then I think if we just try and add a ton of these, unfortunately we don't really have the weeds that we'd like to use, which are so prevalent in this area of Massachusetts as well as in Denmark. It's a feature I would have really loved to be able to add, but we don't really have that. But we do have these, and maybe if we just try and, I wonder if we can keep if we smooth this out a bit more, or actually if we just grab just above the waterfront here, can we create sort of a beach vibe here? So if we just do this, and then we do a lot of smoothing here and a lot of smoothing here, so that the dune starts a little later. Something like this. And then we move in, and this time around we try to remove the bushes, so we don't have any on our actual beach. They kind of stop where the dune stops, something like this. It's not perfect, but we're getting there. I guess we can make it even more smooth by using the slope terrain tool. Right click up here and then just trying to drag a bit. Yeah, we're getting there at least, but it is tricky. I mean, that's of course the running joke. We've just had the beach properties DLC or pack or whatever we want to call it, but we can't actually create sandy beaches in game unless we resort to using surfaces from the developer mode, and obviously that's really not perfect because they have like a very clear outline that we'll have to mask. In fact, let's just try that so that we can see if we can actually mask that outline. So we're gonna grab the sand texture 1, disable snapping, and then we'll see if this is even gonna be possible. So I'm hoping that the transition in texture colors is a little less rough now that we've done some terraforming. We've got some cliff textures here on the dune, and we've got some shallow waters here. But yeah, we'll see how this actually looks. And just connect that up. Yeah, it's a pretty rough transition, to say the least. And you know, I almost want to try and cover it up with trees just to make it less harsh. But let's just try and see if we can sort of get away with this just using the bushes. So if I select couple of these, especially the bigger one here, and just create a ton near the edge here, and then spam a bit afterwards with a higher concentration of the brush of bushes alongside the transition here, then hopefully it's gonna make it a lot more smooth. And we might also, actually, I'm thinking that for the theme, if we change the, it's gonna be dirt diffuse to default, then the transition is probably even smoother. So we're definitely getting there. I just want to avoid having to spam big trees here to completely cover up the transition, because I don't think that's really the look we want. Let's go and grab some rocks as well and just get them in there. And then we might do some boulders as well. I don't know how prevalent these would be on a beach like this in Massachusetts, but it's it's a compromise, all of this, when we don't have more tools available to us. I think getting the transition is just the most important thing, and then we'll have to sacrifice a bit of realism in the process. Speaking of realism, we've got a pack of moose having a drink, really having a drink. But let's see how this actually looks. I'm pretty content with this. I mean, it's not exactly like a sand dune, and we don't have the weeds and grass props that we'd really want, but generally I think this concept we've created here, it will have to do. And I'm thinking for the beach areas, we're gonna have the concentration of beaches is gonna be much higher on the eastern shorelines of our peninsulas and our island, as that is, you know, what faces the Atlantic, while the western shorelines of the isles will have less rough waters, so you'll have less erosion and, you know, not as wide beaches. That's the same here in Denmark, where the beaches alongside the western coast of the country, which faces, well, England is in the way, but otherwise would face the Atlantic Ocean, they're generally much wider and have much bigger sand dunes. While on the eastern coast, it's much quieter. So with that in mind, let's try and take the concept we've created here and make it on a bigger scale here, where we've created this bay, because that's gonna provide a better opportunity, I think, to really try and see how this concept looks. So we'll smoothen out some of the transitions up front with terraforming as much as possible to just make it a little easier for us. And then for the dunes, we're gonna make sure we have the default brush, because it's very smooth. And then let's just create a very simple set of dunes. Replace the trees with bushes primarily. And then adding in the 2 million bushes. And this is pretty much the final result, and I'm pretty happy with how this is turning out with the limitations we're working with. I think this looks it looks pretty unique. The combination of the dunes and all the bushes is making it look quite alright. I would have loved to have a bit of a smoother transition here on these small these tiny peninsulas that kind of frame off this small inlet or bay here. So I did elevate it a bit just to get the dirt and cliff texture to poke through a bit. But that transition is pretty rough, and that's just how it's gonna be as long as we don't use trees. But overall, I think, especially as we zoom out, it really does look quite nice. So I'm going to jump into cleaning up some of these islands here. So let's just get rid of the trees as our first course of action. Get the brush size real big. Get it all removed, because these islands here I'm going to remove completely. Most of the island out here, but not completely, because there are parts of it outside the borders of the map which I can't remove. So I think it's fine that there's a small island out here. And of course, none of this has to be permanent. We can, we can create new islands and whatnot if we need it in the future. But I think for now we just want to try and clean this up and get it to look a little more Massachusetts, and which is definitely not a term in real life. But there we go. We've got a bit of stuff to actually remove out of the base map here. And removing these is fairly simple. Just going to grab our level terrain tool, then grab a level from the seafloor and just remove them. And then I'm gonna jump into the developer menu to speed up the water simulation so that we can really get rid of it quickly. And we might as well just keep these two out here. And then here we're probably gonna have to do a lot of smoothing as well as creating what's essentially a beach, because we are facing the Atlantic here. So we'll just try and do this rather quickly. This is really not a focal point that we're like really focusing on, and we probably won't for a long time. So just some very simple changes out here. Next up, we're gonna do some changes to the Cape Autumn Peninsula. We're gonna keep this slightly cliffy hill here, where we've got some pretty nicely located houses. At least I'd like to live here. But then we're gonna just change the seabed a bit so that it's a little less deep. And then we're going to create like a massive bay here. So I'm just gonna elevate the seafloor here and probably smoothen out much of this as well. Something like this. And then we're going to grab just above the water level here, and we'll create a bay as well. We'll reduce the size of this to create like a very small peninsula. Have one here as well. And increase the size again, just to add some extra areas for development. And beaches. Because then we're gonna remove this island entirely. Or at least something like this, and then maybe we can just keep this, smoothen it out ever so slightly. And then let's just bring up the developer menu and try and increase the water simulation speed to max, just to see where this settles. And this is how it looks from above. Pretty happy with how this turned out with the new little peninsula, the little bay here. So we'll of course add a bit of beach textures and some bushes and stuff. But before we get to that, those detailing bits, I'm going to jump into a time lapse and do some more island merges and removal of other islands and whatnot. And we're gonna use the our sea lanes as guidance so that we make sure we don't mess up our ocean going traffic here. So it's fall and the leaves have changed into a variety of beautiful colors. Let's take a little recap of what we've done so far. Merged a few of the islands out here and removed a handful of other islands. Some very basic detailing here with the terraforming tools and some tree brushes. Created a small lake here as well. Removed a bunch of islands out here. For these two main islands, I just connected them together. There were a bunch of separate islands before, and then I made them a lot less slopey. Still a few hills here and there, but nothing fancy compared to before. Generally, the map is just less sloped now. Yeah, the mountain change here I did off camera. It was sort of boring, and it's definitely not perfect, but I think it suits a little better now at least. Created these small peninsulas that kind of stick out and added a bunch of trees. I think since these are turning east towards the Atlantic, there should probably be beaches here as well, but I just can't be bothered. We'll add that if it becomes relevant, since it's kind of off map basically. The beach area here I'm still pretty happy with. And if we move over here to the peninsula that attaches to the big northern part of the county here, created a beach here, and I added in all these spruce trees because I just liked the look, even though it might not be as realistic and doesn't really match the beach we've got going over here. But I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. There are also a few additional places I've prepared for creating a beach, such as this small bay that we already had at the beginning of this episode, but that I've just made a little more dramatic as part of the island where Chowder Bay is located. The same deal over here, this is just south of downtown West Point, and a couple of other places. I also created this long narrow peninsula here, which also spawned another bay, and once again I used lots of bushes and the spruce trees, and they probably fit in a little better here than over here because they're they're very much shielded from the forces of the Atlantic Ocean when they're on the other side of Autumn Cape here. And pretty happy with how this turned out. It was pretty quick to build as well. So before we wrap up, there's one more natural feature I'd like to try and create, and that's sort of like a marshy or swampy area. And I've got an idea for like trying to create it over here. So what I'm hoping I can do is just grab a level that's just above sea level, so alongside this contour line here. Then we're gonna greatly reduce the size of this and then just try and create these really thin stretches of land. Then gonna grab the softened terrain, go really big and just quickly move across it so that we've got this type of look here. And then we're gonna grab some bushes, as is so often the case, small ones and dead ones, and then just add a ton of these. And this doesn't really work, so I'm gonna try and do something else, because I guess I kind of did what I wanted to do in reverse. I'm gonna turn the whole thing into a very small elevated piece of land first, and then we're gonna grab this level here and drag that through. And then we'll need to get the water to kind of do what we want, so we'll speed up the simulation, because otherwise this would take forever. And that is certainly more like it. Let's just slow down the water simulation again. Come in with some of these bushes. And then let's just really start spamming. And it's a pretty interesting look. Not sure it's really perfect, but it just adds a bit extra to the map, adds a bit extra detail and makes it a little more interesting. So I think I'm gonna try and see if I can kind of create a few of these type areas in here as well, by just grabbing the level of the water here and then just bringing in some of these small narrow canals almost. But I think we're gonna have to just lower the overall level of the waterfront here before we do that, because it's a bit elevated. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. And I'm gonna leave a few spots where I don't do this, just so that when I start smoothing it, they're like small hilly bits as well. Sort of like this, I think. And then we'll once again go ahead and grab a level where we know we're gonna see a bit of water poke through. And to place the bushes, I'm probably just gonna buy a couple of tiles out here because I expect us to start expanding in this direction in a coming episode, now that we've got a lot more space to work with. We're gonna grab our brush here. Gonna go for relatively small bushes and add in a ton. And I also think this turned out alright. We've got some pretty interesting lines here in the water, which I think I'm gonna keep. Looks pretty, yeah, interesting. And with these final projects in place, I think it's time that we wrap up this episode. It's been a ton of fun actually working with some terraforming for once. I did a terraforming episode in Riverview as well, and it really changed the look of the city. And I think the same is really the case here. We might do more extensive terraforming in the future, of course, but I think for now this is what we'll get done in this episode at least. So yeah, personally, I can't wait to start actually developing some nice areas here. Some urban areas, some farmland, some office parks, and everything in between. I hope it's gonna be a lot of fun. And I hope that you agree that the map is a little more Massachusetts looking now, at least. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll make sure to shoot some cinematics, and I hope to see you all in the next one. And I think as a final note, I'll make sure to link to a Patreon post down below so that you can grab the ArchipelagoTurbo map that we started out with, because I'm sure some of you actually prefer how it looked before I made these changes. But yeah, once again, thank you. Goodbye.